Imagine landing at Charles de Gaulle expecting cinematic romance, yet instead stepping into a wealthy nation quietly unraveling beneath polished stone perfume ads and carefully preserved illusion. You arrive believing France represents elegance, balance, and security, but discover an economy slowly bleeding beneath croissant culture and an international reputation frozen in time. This is not collapse through chaos or war, but decline through comfort, denial, and policies designed to protect yesterday at the expense of tomorrow. France looks rich, sounds confident, and dresses beautifully. Yet behind the facade sits a shrinking middle class and a state running permanently on borrowed money. The tragedy is subtle, polite, and bureaucratic, unfolding without sirens, while the country reassures itself that nothing fundamental is truly wrong. To understand modern France, you must look past tourism posters and ask why ambition feels punished, effort feels pointless, and prosperity feels increasingly inaccessible. This is the story of a nation that still sells luxury to the world while quietly rationing opportunity to its own people. The decline begins not with factories or debt, but with something more corrosive, the slow flattening of motivation, reward, and personal aspiration. Economists call it smicodization, but culturally, it feels like a society where striving no longer meaningfully improves your life. Imagine doing everything right, elite education, long hours, responsibility, only to earn barely more than someone performing unskilled labor. In France, the gap between minimum wage and the median salary has collapsed into an insultingly narrow margin. When effort no longer pays, innovation stalls, ambition retreats, and mediocrity becomes the safest emotional investment. This compression of wages did not happen overnight, but through decades of policy shielding the bottom while freezing the ceiling. As minimum wages rise aggressively, companies cannot afford to raise salaries above them, trapping millions in economic purgatory. Today, a staggering share of French workers earn minimum wage or hover just above it, regardless of education or responsibility. The psychological toll is immense, transforming careers into endurance tests rather than ladders of progress. Why work harder when the reward is symbolic, delayed, or erased entirely by taxation and cost of living? This quiet demoralization spreads faster than unemployment poisoning productivity without ever showing up in headline statistics. The result is a nation functioning but no longer dreaming, stable on paper, yet emotionally bankrupt beneath the surface. And this is only the first layer of a deeper economic unraveling hiding behind France's beautiful exterior. If wages crush ambition, housing finishes the job, turning stable employment into a logistical puzzle where survival depends on roommates, inheritance, or leaving entirely. In major cities, rent quietly consumes salaries, transforming independence into a luxury and adulthood into a prolonged state of managed scarcity. Living in Paris on a median income is not difficult or uncomfortable. It is mathematically impossible without external support. The city functions less as a home and more as a showcase where workers commute long distances to serve a lifestyle they cannot afford. This spatial inequality fractures society, separating those who inherit location from those forced into endless movement. Beyond housing lies a deeper wound. France no longer builds enough of anything that sustains broad prosperity. Travel north or east from Paris, and the scenery shifts from boutiques to silence abandoned factories and towns frozen in economic time. These regions once formed the industrial backbone that anchored middle-class life outside major capitals. Today, they are museums of lost productivity, preserved by nostalgia rather than investment. Manufacturing now represents a surprisingly small share of national output, far lower than comparable European economies. France chose services, tourism, and prestige branding over production, betting that experience could replace industry. The bet worked for visitors, but failed catastrophically for workers whose skills were tied to physical creation. When factories leave, entire ecosystems collapse, from suppliers to schools, clinics, and small family businesses. Economic decay spreads outward, hollowing towns long before it appears in national statistics. What remains is resentment, political anger, and a sense of abandonment disguised as cultural grievance. Protest movements erupt not from ideology but from geographic isolation and economic erasure. The distance between Parisian prosperity and provincial decline grows wider each year. Luxury exports thrive while domestic production withers, creating an economy that serves outsiders better than citizens. Even basic manufacturing capacity vanished, exposing dangerous dependencies during moments of crisis. A country that forgets how to build eventually forgets how to grow. If deindustrialization hollowed, the body debt hollowed the soul, quietly turning the French state into a household living forever on its credit card. Unlike America, France cannot print money freely, relying instead on markets' confidence and the patience of neighbors who grow increasingly uneasy. Public debt now exceeds national output, a level once reserved for emergencies, but treated as routine governance. For half a century, the French state has failed to balance its budget even once, regardless of ideology or leadership. Every generation promised reforms later, choosing comfort now and postponing consequences indefinitely. This debt did not fund bold reinvention or future growth, but maintenance of an expensive status quo. France built the most generous welfare system on earth without building an economy capable of sustaining it. Social spending consumes roughly one-third of national output, dwarfing comparable nations once seen as models of generosity. Safety nets became hammocks, and hammocks became permanent fixtures financed through borrowing. As growth slowed, debt accelerated, creating a widening gap no politician dared confront honestly. Interest payments now rival education spending, forcing the future to pay for the past. This is not abstract accounting, but a moral trade where children inherit obligations they never consented to. The illusion persists because collapse has not yet arrived, only erosion. Markets tolerate France not because it is healthy, but because alternatives appear worse. Confidence functions like oxygen, invisible until suddenly absent. Should confidence break, the welfare state collapses faster than it was ever built. Debt transforms politics into theater, where promises replace solutions and time replaces courage. Each year without reform increases the eventual cost of correction. France lives suspended between denial and inevitability, protected only by global complacency. The debt bomb ticks quietly ignored because silence feels safer than truth. Debt would be survivable if incomes were strong, but France operates inside a salary illusion engineered by one of the heaviest tax systems on earth. What employees see on contracts bears little resemblance to what employers actually pay or what workers finally take home. Hiring a skilled professional requires companies to spend enormous sums before a single euro reaches the employee. Employer contributions erase a large share, immediately transforming generosity into fiscal punishment for job creation. The remaining gross salary is then stripped again through employee social charges, reducing apparent prosperity to a hollow figure. Income tax finishes the process, ensuring nearly half of all labor value disappears before groceries are purchased. This system does not punish laziness, it punishes employment itself. France captures nearly half of its entire national output through taxes and mandatory contributions. The state promises security in exchange, yet delivers stagnation instead. Businesses hesitate to hire scale or reward talent because each raise triggers disproportionate fiscal pain. Workers trapped between high taxes and high prices lose disposable income and long-term optimism. The economy slows, then policymakers respond by demanding even more revenue to compensate. This creates a tightening spiral where growth suffocates beneath its own administrative weight. Wealth creation becomes culturally suspect, framed as exploitation rather than value generation. For years, France taxed wealth simply for existing regardless of income or productivity. Predictably, capital fled quietly but efficiently, relocating ambition beyond national borders. Even after reforms, the message remains clear: success requires apology and permission. The result is an economy allergic to risk-reward and rapid transformation. While other nations chase opportunity, France audits it, regulates it, and ultimately discourages it. A country cannot tax its way to prosperity, yet France keeps trying. Nowhere is the French contradiction clearer than retirement, a system sold as solidarity but functioning mathematically like a slow-moving demographic trap. The pensions you fund today are not savings, they are immediate transfers to someone already retired. This model worked when populations were young, growing, and industrially productive. It breaks down when society's age growth slows, and fewer workers support more beneficiaries. France once had several workers for every retiree, creating effortless balance and political comfort. Today, that ratio has collapsed, and each worker carries an ever heavier burden. Life expectancy rises, while birth rates stagnate, stretching the system beyond its design limits. The math is unforgiving, yet political courage remains scarce. Raising the retirement age triggers unrest because it exposes promises that can no longer be honored. Cutting pensions is considered unthinkable despite their growing cost. As a result, deficits persist and contributions rise quietly, taxing the young to subsidize the old. Younger generations understand they may never receive what they are forced to fund. This creates resentment, disguised as apathy, and disengagement, masked as stability. The streets burn not for ideology, but for arithmetic reality finally colliding with narrative. Every delay compounds future pain, yet postponement remains the default strategy. France has chosen paralysis over reform, comfort over sustainability. Retirement becomes less a promise than a political fiction maintained through borrowing. The intergenerational contract phrase as trust erodes on both sides. A system meant to protect dignity now quietly undermines social cohesion. When demographics turn hostile, denial becomes the most expensive policy of all. When opportunity shrinks at home, talent leaves quietly, and France is experiencing one of the most efficient brain drains in the developed world. The country produces exceptional engineers, researchers, and financiers, yet fails to offer them reasons to stay. Elite education remains world-class, but post-graduation reality feels constrained, hierarchical, and financially unrewarding. Ambitious young professionals compare futures and choose mobility over loyalty. Abroad, their skills command higher pay, lower taxes, faster advancement, and greater personal autonomy. Remaining in France often means accepting capped ambition and delayed recognition. Millions of French citizens now live abroad disproportionately drawn from the most skilled and entrepreneurial. This is not cultural curiosity, it is economic selection removing the country's growth engine. Innovation follows people, not borders, and France exports its innovators generously. Startups founded by French minds often scale elsewhere, where capital and regulation align with risk. The state funds education, but foreign economies collect the returns. This silent subsidy accelerates domestic stagnation while flattering national pride. Without talent, concentration ecosystems weaken and ambition fragments. Success stories become exceptions, celebrated precisely because they are rare. Staying requires acceptance of ceilings that global markets no longer impose. Leaving becomes not betrayal, but rational adaptation. Each departure lowers pressure for reform, easing symptoms while worsening disease. The country loses not only workers, but mentors, founders, and institutional challengers. Over time, stagnation becomes cultural, not merely economic. A nation that educates excellence yet cannot retain it mortgages its future quietly. The final betrayal of high taxes is that the services they once justified are quietly breaking down in plain sight. For decades, the French accepted heavy contributions in exchange for world-class public services. That social contract is now fraying faster than officials admit. Hospitals remain free, but access is rationed through time delay and exhaustion. Emergency rooms stretch waits into double-digit hours, turning urgency into endurance. Rural regions become medical deserts, where finding a doctor feels like winning a lottery. Retiring physicians vanish faster than new ones arrive, the result of decades of planning failures. Education follows the same pattern of quiet decline beneath proud rhetoric. Classrooms grow crowded, while standards fall and inequality widens. Teachers are underpaid, demoralized, and increasingly difficult to recruit. To fill gaps, standards are lowered, trading excellence for mere supervision. Justice moves slowly, burdened by underfunding and overwhelming caseloads. Delayed rulings quietly erode trust in institutions meant to guarantee fairness. Infrastructure ages without renewal, surviving on patches rather than vision. The wealthy adapt by opting out, purchasing privately what the state can no longer provide. This creates a two-tier society, hidden beneath slogans of equality. Those without means are left navigating deteriorating systems they still finance. The promise of universal quality becomes selective reality. Equality carved into stone remains, but its substance has thinned. When public services fail, legitimacy follows them into decline. Beneath every economic statistic lies a psychological one, and France is suffering from a deep national crisis of expectation. Year after year, surveys rank the French among the most pessimistic people on earth regarding their future. This pessimism exists despite comfort, safety, and cultural wealth that much of the world would envy. The source is not poverty, but disappointment measured against an extraordinary historical self-image. France was raised on greatness, empire, enlightenment, and universal influence. Modern reality feels smaller, quieter, and increasingly irrelevant by comparison. This gap between myth and reality creates a constant low-grade depression across society. When people expect decline, they behave in ways that guarantee it. Consumers save instead of spend, fearing instability even during calm periods. Entrepreneurs hesitate knowing failure carries lasting stigma rather than second chances. Risk avoidance becomes cultural wisdom, not weakness. Bankruptcy remains a scarlet letter rather than a lesson. Political extremes thrive where hope collapses and trust evaporates. Anger replaces optimism as the dominant civic emotion. The country debates decline endlessly, yet struggles to imagine renewal. Media, politics, and conversation reinforce the narrative of managed decay. This mindset becomes an invisible tax heavier than any fiscal levy. You can reform laws quickly, but repairing collective belief takes generations. France now lives trapped between nostalgia for greatness and fear of change. A nation convinced of its own decline rarely mobilizes to prevent it. France's decline matters beyond its borders because it functions as an early warning system for the entire Western world. What appears uniquely French is actually a preview of pressures facing every wealthy democracy. Aging populations reduce workers while expanding obligations everywhere, not just in Europe. France simply encountered the demographic wall sooner than others. Deindustrialization followed a similar pattern, with factories sacrificed for short-term efficiency and global integration. The difference is speed, not direction, and France moved faster down the same path. Debt became the universal anesthetic dulling pain without curing disease. Running permanent deficits in peaceful times is no longer exceptional but normalized. Political systems strain as promises outgrow resources and compromise becomes betrayal. In France, centrist stability collapsed, leaving polarization as the dominant equilibrium. Extremes thrive when middle ground loses credibility. This polarization mirrors patterns emerging across North America and Europe. France is not an outlier, it is a laboratory. It attempts to sustain 20th century living standards with 21st century demographics. When adjustment is delayed long enough, correction arrives violently. A loss of confidence in French debt would not remain a domestic problem. As Europe's second largest economy, France anchors continental stability. A crisis there would reverberate through banks, currencies, and pensions worldwide. The illusion of safety persists only while trust holds. France shows what happens when trust becomes the final pillar holding everything up. The question then is not whether France will change, but whether change arrives through reform or through crisis. History shows France is resilient, capable of surviving wars, revolutions, and occupations that would shatter weaker nations. Beneath the stagnation lies talent, culture, and institutional memory still capable of renewal. Signs of revival exist in pockets where ambition escapes traditional constraints. Young entrepreneurs quietly build companies despite regulation, taxation, and social suspicion. Innovation hubs grow not because the system supports them, but because individuals resist it. Yet resistance alone cannot reverse structural arithmetic. Debt remains real, demographics remain hostile, and productivity remains constrained. The illusion of wealth survives only through borrowing and deferred reckoning. Social peace is purchased with money the state does not possess. Eventually, markets or voters will demand honesty. When that moment comes, adjustment will be painful regardless of preparation. The difference is whether pain is managed or explosive. France stands at the crossroads between gradual reform and sudden correction. The postcard image will not warn you when the turning point arrives. Decline often feels comfortable until it becomes unavoidable. France's story is not finished, but the next chapter will be written under constraint. For outsiders, the lesson is simple: beauty can coexist with fragility. Do not mistake elegance for sustainability or heritage for solvency. What you see in France today may be the future your own country is quietly approaching.